It has been a very bleak start to the new year for Ukrainians. Russian attacks pounded the city of Kiev for a second night overnight. The drone attacks have targeted critical infrastructure and have injured at least one person. And let's remind you, it's day 313. Russia invaded Ukraine 313 days ago in what it called a special military operation. Let's chat now to Professor Abel Esterhuyse, Stellenbosch University's Department of Strategy Chair. Prof, thank you for being with us. What do you make of the drone attacks? Firstly, Russia says it's targeting drone production facilities in Ukraine. Ukrainian officials say Moscow is deliberately targeting civilians and infrastructure to destroy morale for the winter months.
Yeah, I think the one clear aspect that is quite clear is that there's so much in this war we don't know. There's so much we don't see. The information picture is not clear. And so every side is trying to play the game according to, his narrative. But for me, the takeaway here is the dynamic nature of war, the fact that war is always sort of ironic in its outcome and in its manifestation. And perhaps, the best thing for us at the moment is to look at the variables that perhaps will play a key role in how the war is to unfold in the next couple of months.
Well, let's look at that. But firstly, day 313, and like you said, it's often hard to verify what is going on. We hear from the big media organizations that are there that often they can't get first-hand knowledge of each and every attack, and they don't know the motives. Do you believe that some fatigue has set in from the rest of the world around the details of this war that has become very protracted now?
Well, it's always a case of reading widely, read in depth, and read in context if you read about war. And that goes for sort of both sides. So you have to build up a clear intelligence picture over time to develop a clear understanding for what is going on at the moment. And we have to understand that it seems as if Russia at the moment is pursuing the only option that seems to provide some strategic effect for Russia in this war, and that is the strategic attack of and on the infrastructure of the Ukraine, the electricity infrastructure, the water infrastructure, what we normally refer to as the strategic infrastructure. And that at the moment seems to be the only pathway for success for Russia in the war.
And nobody can read the mind of Vladimir Putin, but there was some saying that he would have expected the war to be quick, go in, take Ukraine. The fact that we're on day 313 and, like you say, Russia has to now focus on these strategic targets, does that mean Russia is losing?
Well, it's not. It doesn't mean Russia is losing. I think that's perhaps a mistake that one may make if you look at the war and to argue that Russia is losing it. In my opinion, there's a number of critical issues that we need to unpack here. The first is obviously the availability of logistics. A lot has been said about the Russian logistical capability to sustain the war. Recently, a lot has been said about the ammunition supply to both the Russian forces and Ukraine. And that's both at a strategic level, the production of weapon systems, and the supply thereof at a tactical and operational level to the forces in the field. And then, of course, there's the ability, secondly, of Russia and Ukraine not only to mobilize the appropriate number of forces, but also to train them, to equip them, and eventually also employ them in this war. And a lot has been said recently about Russia's, how they employ their forces, and as one analyst described it, as a human road bump. it's a lot of killing that's being done by the Ukraine, it seems. And then thirdly, I think there's a lot of discussion going on about the willingness of the West to sustain and to provide Ukraine with the necessary offensive ground and air support capabilities. The war is now reaching a stage where sustainability become an issue, and so the Western support for Ukraine has become a critical issue in the war. Then there's the role of China. It'll be interesting to see how China balance its role in this war. Up until now, it has remained relatively neutral. On the one hand, providing some political support to Russia, but on the other hand, also, China wanting to maintain its economic ties with the West, and they don't want to annulate or rather sever their ties with the US. And then lastly, I think a critical issue is strategic leadership. And here we're talking about the leadership of Zelensky, of course, that have come forward as perhaps the leader in the war. Putin, that is trying to provide critical leadership from a Russian side. But there's also the leadership of people like Biden and the German Chancellor and Britain. So there's leadership issues here at the strategic level that will have a critical impact on how the war unfolds in the next couple of months.
And as you've laid out, I mean, there's so many moving parts and so many facets here. You spoke about the West and their appetite to sustain the war or sustain support for Ukraine. What about Russia's appetite? Do you think this war could go on for well over a year? Russia saying it's annexed 1/3 of Ukraine thus far. Can you speculate as to its own appetite to continue and lose those troops?
Well, more recently, there's a lot of discussion about Russian demographics and the availability of manpower for Russia to sustain the war. We need to keep in mind that a lot of Russians of military age have left the country. They don't want to serve in the Russian military. They've simply left Russia. And there's a whole range of political factors that comes into play for the Putin administration in the mobilization of forces. It seems as if the emphasis is not so much on the cities. It's more on the rural areas that the mobilization is sort of emphasizing. So there's a lot of questions on the Russian side and their ability to mobilize, as I've said, to train their forces, to equip them and to employ them. And employment means that enough leadership should be available on the Russian side. And we know that the Russian officers in particular have taken and have paid a lot of them were killed in this war. So they've paid a high price already. So a lot of questions being asked about the Russian military leadership at all levels, from platoon command level to brigade and division level.
And then, of course, it depends on how the public starts to take those deaths, if they were very supportive in the beginning. Professor, final question for you. Any advice for South Africa as it takes up the helm of BRICS? That is a rotational leadership position. But South Africa now in that position, BRICS, while Russia is at war, we've always taken a neutral stance. Could we be influential in trying to get the parties together as we have been in the past?
Well, I hope South Africa can play a positive role here in perhaps, trying to provide a bridge between our most important trading partners in the West and the political dynamics of what is unfolding in the BRICS area. But the dynamics within the BRICS countries will be interesting to watch. China, Russia, India in particular, the dynamics between those three will be quite a challenging balancing act. And then if you add South Africa and Brasilia to that mix, it becomes a challenging group of countries to manage, and each of them bringing their own interests to the table, economic interest in particular. It'll be interesting to add the military dynamics to BRICS and see how that unfolds, because up until now, BRICS have mostly been a diplomatic and an economic grouping of countries, and all of a sudden the military has been added to the mix. So it'll be interesting how South Africa handle this.
All right, thank you very much. Professor Abel Esterhuyse, Stellenbosch University Department of Strategy Chair.